Well, a nice winter's afternoon to everyone. You know, of course, Fons Vitae's signature subject matter are the Merton Interfaith series and the Great Ghazali series, but we also have a great strength and interest in symbolism and metaphysics and all of this. And some of my favorite titles I thought I just mentioned today because maybe they've been forgotten. Of course, Martin Ling's wonderful Symbol and Archetype, a study in the meaning of existence. There's a way of actually, in order to understand existence, you need symbolism. And he does wonderful things. For just one idea in this particular book that was interesting to me. He, of course, talks about the symbolism of pairs and the tree of life and all this, but he does one on the 7 deadly sins in the light of numbers, symbolism of numbers. And he came to gluttony. And if you think about what's going on with gluttony, a person is trying to find kind of infinite pleasure by eating more and more. The only reason they stop eating is because they can't get any more in. Well, seeking infinite pleasure in something that's finite is an inversion of something. Really what that leaning is toward is seeking infinite pleasure in what is infinite and eternal and divine. And so in a certain sense, there's a great important symbolic message to us on where to seek that doesn't just end up in some finite package. Then one of my favorite books is Water, Its Spiritual Significance. And this, of course, has wonderful stories from all the faith traditions, the American Indians, poets, people like, Wendell Berry, Robert Frost, a lot of the greats. It's chock full and it has a wonderful introduction on really the metaphysical underpinnings of symbolism. This is one of my great and most favorite books, and it had a passage I might like to mention. It says, "The symbol is the revelation of a higher order of reality in a lower order, through which man can be led back to the higher realm." And then it says, "The cosmos is composed of meanings set up in images." That's really fantastic stuff if you think about it. Now here's a book that's totally different that we did. It's called Waiting and Being. And these are the sketches of one of Kentucky's great portrait artists. But her pleasure was not in being paid to do a portrait and having it had to look like the person. It was sketching. And in the end, she and her husband, I think, both had cancer, and she started sketching people in waiting rooms. She started sketching people waiting for things, waiting for trains, waiting to get an answer, waiting to finish the end of the book, waiting to reach the last row of knitting. All these images of waiting rooms, and then she did pictures of people in a state of being. And then you can think, how much of your life are you actually waiting to see how things come out? Now, is that the right direction to go? Or is it, instead of always waiting for something, actually finding the essence of your being in being? And she does those sketches too. And this is full of articles by different people on some of the subjects she wrote about, personal stories. Perfectly wonderful book. Someone said it was the only normal book we'd ever brought out, but it's a great one. And then, of course, I always go back to the great Rationale Divinorum Officiorum, written by the Dean of Chartres Cathedral, explaining the symbolism in the 1200s. The 12th century is when the symbolism was attributed to everything in the Christian church. And we look at so much, we know the architecture and the paintings, their symbolism. But one of the chapters in here, this was translated out of the Latin, that interested me was about the sacred vestments, the vêtements, what the priests and people wear in the service. And you see this. And so I wanted to show you something and tell you a little bit about it. There were 2 things that struck me. Right here is something called a chasuble. And this is an overgarment that goes over all the other garments that the priest is wearing. It's like, and the chasuble is meant to remind the priest to be charitable, that charity should overwhelm and envelop everything in your life. And there's quite a nice little phrase that comes from the book. It says, Though I speak with the tongue of men and angels and have not charity, I am a nothing. It's to remind the priest or the wearer, the surrounding, enveloping force of one's being should be charity. And also, we're aware that the priest or the bishop wears something called a mitre. It's this pointed cap here, right? And it has bands that hang down, like with tongues. And also, it's jeweled like a crown. So one could say, well, why in the world is the bishop wearing a crown? Well, interesting enough, the two peaks are to remind him that in his mind he must have an understanding of both the Old and New Testament. The two bands that are said to be like tongues hanging down, those are to remind him to speak not just of the literal, but of the mystical, spiritual meaning of the text. But the jewels are to remind him that he should be humble. And there's a nice little passage. Whosoever exalteth himself will be abased, and he that abaseth himself shall be exalted. In other words, the bearer, the wearer of this crown, this mitre, was to be reminded of the urgency of humility. So this is a wonderful book, mostly about architecture and art. But I attended a celebration of an archbishop becoming an archbishop. And as everyone strode in all their robes carrying all the things, it was fascinating to actually be able to understand what I was looking at. So then another work of great interest. Now this is something. There's a man, he's an astrophysicist and an engineer who lives in Dubai, and he made his Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca twice and thought, I don't know what I'm doing and I don't know what anything means. And all these words stand for different things in the pilgrimage, and I don't know what's going on. So he learned Aramaic and Hebrew and went back to see what the philological, the etymological meaning of these different words were, that went back into the tradition of even the pilgrimage to the ancient Temple of Solomon, which is fascinating to see the closeness of the inner meaning of the terminology in the triliteral root system of these three languages, because so much of meaning comes from language. And of course, that's another dimension, is that words are symbols, are they not? So words are symbols. And so I thought also, here's something interesting. Here is another wonderful book, The Fundamental Symbols, The Universal Language of Sacred Science by the great René Guénon. And in this, of course, he deals with the profundity, but he deals with symbols of things that we actually, in our normal life, like the bridge and the rainbow, or you've heard of the Holy Grail. What is really going on with that? Other kinds of symbols that he really, really important symbols that we hear about all the time in our lives. So I thought that this would be something that would be very interesting to you. And I forgot to say something about waiting and being. Someone explained to me the word for waiting, the verb for waiting in Aramaic, Hebrew, Arabic is istidar. And what that means, it means to have time and space to look within. So maybe that's what our waiting period is about. I didn't want you to miss that wonderful idea. And then another great favorite, we just spoke of the Temple of Solomon. There are sacred receptacles that are symbolic. And if you look at this book, you'll see here is the Ark, Noah's Ark. Look at all the symbolism that comes with that. And here is the Ark of the Covenant. Now, the Ark of the Covenant is the container in which the two tablets that Moses received on Mount Sinai were kept. And this, surrounded by cherubim, guardians, was in the Temple of Solomon. Is a fascinating description of the veils that went around it in the room that had alternating cherubim and the tree of life, the palm. And of course, the Temple of Solomon ended, and the question is, where is the Ark of the Covenant today? I know that there is a place is it in Ethiopia, where they say there's a place in which the Ark is today, but no one can go and see it. But imagine how interesting it is to see the symbolism of receptacles, as of the sacred. Then I just have to read you something adorable. The universal meaning of the Kabbalah, as you know, the Kabbalah of Jewish mysticism deals with, the most inward materials, and it also, you're dealing also with the Kabbalah, in terms of a journey to the soul. And there's something that Jacob Needleman wrote, who's very famous, Jerry Needleman, that I put on the back of the book, which will, I think, appeal to all of you. He says, and what have I done with my glasses? I don't know where my glasses are. Here they are. Okay, he says, he says, this book will be extremely useful to anyone who is, in the words of Maimonides, perplexed by the Bible in the sense of having exercised his best thinking about it, and who now stands broken before its apparent contradictions and its overwhelming emotional authority. The Kabbalah, and then he goes on. But anyway, this is an extraordinary book by the great Swiss metaphysician Leo Shaya. And then lastly, I'm going to speak of alchemy, science of the cosmos, a science of the soul. And of course, we all know that we're not talking about the alchemical change from lead into gold, but in fact we are, because we're talking about the transformation of our own stories, our own souls, into their luminous, natural, golden essences. And Titus Burckhardt says an extraordinary thing about alchemy that's useful to all of us, by the way. He mentions that when a substance, any substance, dissolves, it can be a relationship with someone, it can be a dream you had, it can be hopes, it can be a marriage. When something dissolves, when it dissolves, it will have to reform or recongeal in a different form. If ice melts, it's water. It now has the form of water. So what is being said here is that as you watch something in your life dissolve or fall apart, rather than being, oh no, about it, one can be, oh yes, in that it is the opportunity, because it will have to recongeal in another, it can congeal in another and higher and nobler form. So when things fall apart, instead of being saddened, you can say, now I've gone out of my old status quo, and instead of going down, I can rework this to recongeal in a higher form for the edification and transformation of my own soul. So anyway, I hope some of these books on symbols will be of a joy to you. They have been of immense use and support to me in my life. Thank you very much.